A lot happened in the latest chapter of Lookism. Eugene shitting his pants, Yusong bleeding like a faucet, and Daniel seemingly finally getting a lick of aura. Today, we're here to answer the question, after everything he did, is Eugene worse than Epps? Scratch that, I was told that was not the topic of today's video. Last video we talked about if Joan actually stood a chance against Kite after talking crazy like Jake Paul before he fought Anthony Joshua, and it was a resounding no, but today's video might be a different story. The Allied Alliance is finally facing against Kite and James. Tensions are rising and the power scalers are getting their special socks out for this matchup. Who would win? The head of Allied, Gunn's masterpiece, the commander of Soul's monsters Daniel Park, or the one-man circle, the man who single-handedly ended an era, the peak of the first general. Okay, that's enough glazing. That's right, in today's video we are pitting Daniel Park against James Lee. Now I know this matchup seems like an atomic bomb versus the coughing baby, but hear me out first, because it's not as one-sided as you think, and also because I need the watch time. Real quick, we're nearing 2,000 subscribers, so I'll tell you to subscribe in a little bit just so it doesn't mess with the flow of the video. You know, we give him a lot of shit for losing aura just as he's about to look cool, but Daniel is arguably one of the most realized characters in the series. His resume is actually insane. Training with the man who's immune to slander, Vasco, Runcha's #1 Dami Mommy, Sophia, and the plot armor man himself, not to mention his absolutely goated starter pack, a copy ability, and a perfect body. Are we kidding? On top of everything I've just mentioned, he also has his own unique path. Daniel is busted. He's not just a potential man anymore, because he's actually almost fully realized. It took him a month to get to a point where he could essentially no-diff Zhao Lung. You know, the guy who's supposed to be on gun level. Look, I know this sounds like glaze, and I'll zip it up when I'm done with it, but it only took Daniel a month to be on par with fighters like Zack and Vasco, who've been working and fighting for way longer than Daniel was. Not to mention the famous 3v1, where he was the only one creative enough to land a hit on James, and he did that without any mastery or path. Daniel is just so fucking cool, man. Since we're here, let's assess all of the weapons Daniel would use against James. Firstly, his copy ability. This has always been his bread and butter. This has always been his greatest talent. Every fight that Daniel takes, regardless if he wins or loses, exponentially increases his ceiling by miles. Let's break this down. Most copycats, like Johan, have a hardware bottleneck. They can see a move and understand how to do it, but if their muscles aren't strong or fast enough, the move is just a weak imitation. Daniel's second body is perfect. It has no physical limits, and when he copies a move in that body, he executes it with 100% efficiency. He doesn't just imitate a kick, he performs the perfect version of that kick because his body is already at the peak of human capability. Cool. Perfect. He could have totally just invested all of his time into making his second body so much stronger, but nah. Before training with Gunn, Daniel's original body was too weak to use his copy talent effectively. Gunn's training focused on building the vessel. He turned Daniel's body into a high-performance machine so that when Daniel copies a king-level move like Ji Chang Kwok's hand blades, his body can actually handle the impact and speed. Are you hearing what I'm saying right now? Are you smelling what I'm stepping in? Instead of upgrading his second body, he chose to scale his first body to first-generation king level purely for the love of the game. We all clown on him, but Daniel Walk Him Down Park is really like that. With that being said, copy really isn't doing all that much to James. The only applicable use of copy in my opinion is he'll probably just use it for deception, a lot of feints, like how when he fought his second body, throwing a lot of weaker moves to deceive and reel in his opponent and try to finish it faster with stronger moves. But beyond that, it's just kind of a scarce resource for Daniel. He'll eventually run out of moves to use, so he'll have to use them effectively, and that's gonna be difficult considering his opponent. But that's not what we're here for. Deepest intentions. Shit hits the fan when Daniel starts using his path of deepest intentions. In Lookism, finding your path is the moment you stop being absolute fodder. For Daniel, this path is likely built on his unique adaptability, the perfect software he's developed under Gunn's brutal training. When Daniel uses his state, he starts using his own instincts to bridge the gap. If Daniel leads into his own path, he becomes unpredictable, on top of the fact that he's able to basically go into Neo bullet time, seeing everything in slow-mo and seeing the weakness in his opponent, sometimes without even his opponent knowing. James Lee thrives on his high battle IQ, experience, and his ability to read opponents like a script. James is a counterattacker by nature. If Daniel starts throwing moves that James hasn't seen before, using his path to aim them at weak spots, invisible attacks or not, James is gonna get thrown off of his rhythm. This is the stage where Daniel finally lands a hit, forcing James to actually stop smiling and take the fight a little more seriously. Combining his copy and the path, you get a monster that is arguably the closest thing to the perfect body without actually using it. At this level, Daniel would use his path to create fusion fighting moves that don't even exist yet. Imagine Daniel using the copy ability to mimic James Lee's speed speed, but then immediately pivoting to Gabriel's punches. Granted, he was unconscious when he copied that, but we're giving him the benefit of the doubt here. This creates a glitch in James Lee's calculation. James is used to being the fastest, the most technical, but Daniel, who can take advantage of his own unique path in a library of thousands of copied moves, becomes almost a perfect counter to James. James is so good at what he does because he's gone to the point where everything is so predictable. But if Daniel rises to the occasion, where the only difference between Daniel and James is experience, he's gonna be forced to use his own thresholds just to keep up with the sheer volume of high-level techniques being thrown at him. Daniel's path is a perfect counter to a lot of fighters, just because his path is essentially hacks. The real endgame occurs if Daniel unlocks masteries. James has already mastered speed, technique, and strength masteries. If Daniel unlocks his masteries, he neutralizes James's biggest advantage. If he adds strength mastery, something he's been working on by refining his small body, he becomes a fighter who can not only match James in speed, he obviously has James beat in technique because of copy, and potentially overpower him in raw impact. Still kinda iffy on this one. A Daniel Park with masteries is essentially a second generation James Lee, but with the added versatility of the copy talent. At this point, the peak isn't a lonely spot for James anymore. James Lee would be looking at a successor who hasn't just reached him, but has the tools to surpass him. Ultimately, the gap between them right now is experience and completion. James is a master who's a little too cocky, which could be the reason he gets shit on. Daniel is still collecting the pieces, but as Daniel lasers his copy talent under his own path, and then tops it off with the raw power of the masteries, he'll be quite the opponent for James Lee. Before talking about James, you guys remember what I said at the start of the video? So I'll tell you subscribe in a little bit. Subscribe. What, you think you could just watch my video and not give me anything in return? That's not how this world works. You owe this to me. If James actually decided to lock in and stop aura farming in front of that big ass window for 5 minutes, the fight against Daniel would be a generational mop that would put Daniel on permanent fraud watch more than he already is. We're talking about a level of disrespect so profound that even Daniel's perfect body would seem like it doesn't stand a chance. James Lee isn't the peak because he has the best stats, he's the peak because he's the guy who already platinum trophied the game while Daniel is still out here figuring out the tutorials on the game. The moment the fight starts, the aura gap would be physically suffocating. James Lee looks like a professional repo man coming to collect Daniel's kneecaps. He wouldn't just be looking for a knockout, he'd be looking to diminish Daniel's aura. James is a rational fighter who identifies the root of an opponent's strength and takes advantage of it. If Daniel is relying on his newly found path, James would expose every flaw in that path until Daniel loses the will to even stand up. He's the type of fighter who would smile while precisely striking the same nerve over and over, because it's the most efficient way to end a match and get back to aura farming in front of that big ass window. The Lookism community loves to glaze Daniel's copy ability, but in a high stakes encounter with James, that talent becomes a massive liability, power scaling wise. The effectiveness of copy depends on the person's hardware. Daniel can mimic the movements, but James's body is obviously built for his fighting style. When Daniel tries to copy a king like Taesu or Gonn, James Lee doesn't see anything threatening, he just sees a shittier version of an actual full-fledged attack. Kind of like being into Minecraft but downloading Block Adventure or another shitty fake version. Because James speed ran the second most violent era in the series' history. He knows the tell of every martial art before Daniel's brain even processes the input. He'd use predictive counters, getting Daniel not where he is but where his copy technique requires him to be. It's essentially out-reading Daniel's software to the point where Daniel feels like he's fighting someone who's reading the manga chapters 10 seconds before they're even drawn. To truly manhandle Daniel, James would lean heavily into his invisible attacks, which isn't just a speed feat, it's a little 0 MS ping advantage. While Daniel's UI is out here trying to calculate the trajectory of the strike, James is already attacking from 3 different blind spots simultaneously. This is where the skill issue becomes insurmountable. James utilizes a highly refined acrobatic style that keeps him in constant state of flight, staying off the ground and using Daniel's own momentum to turn him into a human pinball. He doesn't need to grapple or show off his AP, he just repositions. Every time Daniel tries to land a perfectly copied heavy hit, James is already 3 feet above him, raining down a flurry of kicks to the temple that hit with the narrative weight of 1,000 first-generation kings. James Lee was actually kind of jealous of the copy talent in the past, but in all honesty, he views it as more of a shortcut for people who can't handle the grind of thresholds, kind of like a cop-out ability. In a serious fight, James would exploit something I like to call the copy lag. Even for a genius like Daniel, there's a microsecond of mental processing game when switching between copied styles, and James Lee, who operates on a refined instinct, would probably strike exactly between those transitions. He wouldn't let Daniel cook for even a second. Every time Daniel tries to switch to gun style, James would intercept the transition with a strike to the solar plexus that sends Daniel back to the character creation screen. Looking at this through the eyes of the peak, Daniel is just a collection of other people's highlights, and James would manhandle him by proving that a compilation, no matter how high quality, cannot stand against the original. He would force Daniel to realize that you cannot copy a threshold, you have to bleed for it. While Daniel possesses the perfect body, James Lee is the perfect fighter. Daniel has the tools to flip Lookism's power skill over its head, but James already be doing that before Daniel even moved to Seoul, and that's what makes this a low-diff victory for Rudder Lee. James would leave Daniel alive, not out of mercy, but because he's a refined tool that needs more time in the oven before he's even worth the effort of a serious hunt. Now, the part you all cream your pants for. Get your special sock out, chat, because I'm not sparing any details. During the early game, the moment the fight starts, James doesn't need to figure Daniel out since he probably already has. His battle IQ means he already identified Daniel's tools and strategies, besides his path of course. Before the first exchange, he knows Daniel is a copier, which means he knows Daniel is probably gonna throw out a bunch of copy moves. Jinrong's elbow, Gunn's Kyokushin, and to be honest, it doesn't really matter what Daniel throws because he already knows what's coming, and it's genuinely so familiar to him that he doesn't even have to prepare for it. So the entire early game strategy is simple. Deny Daniel's moves. Gong Seop's fortress boxing, easy. He beat him once, he can do it again. Taesu's just punches really hard, you get the point. James opens with his invisible attacks immediately, not to finish, just to set the terms. He's not trying to KO Daniel in the first 10 seconds, he's trying to establish that no matter how sharp Daniel is, he cannot catch what is invisible. This is critical because it directly attacks Daniel's confidence in his own path before Deepest Intentions even fully activates. You can't build momentum in a fight where you're spending the first 30 seconds just trying to figure out where the hits are coming from. The copy ability is at its most useless here too. James has already seen every king level technique. Daniel throwing out copied moves in the early game is basically just handing James a scouting report on what's coming next. James doesn't react to where Daniel is, he reacts to where the technique requires Daniel to be. Early game, Daniel is essentially fighting James with borrowed weapons that James helped forge. Early game verdict, James is winning comfortably and Daniel knows it. Mid game though, this is the most important phase of the whole fight to address because Deepest Intentions is genuinely the biggest problem James faces in this entire matchup, and it deserves a real answer. Daniel goes into the Matrix bullet time perception thingy, reading the intention behind a move before it's even thrown. Daniel sees everything behind a move. Its angle, velocity, power, its address, its social security number. It's a pretty meaningful distinction because James's invisible attacks work by removing the visual trajectory entirely. But if Daniel can read the intent before James's body even commits to the motion, the invisibility of the attack becomes pretty fucking visible because Daniel isn't waiting to see it. He's already responding to the decision to throw it. This is where Daniel lands his first real hits. James would probably be in shock, and that's a big deal because James's composure is part of his fighting style. Getting tagged by someone who was just little bro until a few months ago would definitely throw anyone off their rhythm. But here's how I think James deals with it. Deepest Intention reads intention. James Lee is obviously a fighter who's thoroughly mastered his own body, that the gap between his intent and execution is functionally zero. He's gonna fight back against Daniel not because he's threatened by him, but rather he sees it as more of a chore, meaning there's no subsequent intention behind any of his attacks. He'd just be fighting back because he knows it's like breathing. But more importantly, he's one of the few fighters in the verse who can throw an attack with genuine dual intent, meaning he can commit to a strike that is simultaneously a real attack and a feint, both as deception and pure efficiency of motion. He's not faking, both outcomes are real. Against most fighters, this is just high-level technique. Against Deepest Intentions, specifically, this is a direct counter because the path reads an intention that is genuinely ambiguous at the source. Essentially, Daniel's bullet time perception catches a decision, but James is making two at once. On top of that, Deepest Intentions has a cost. It puts serious strain on Daniel's brain over extended use. James recognizes this. His mid-game shifts to let Daniel use it. He absorbs the phase where Daniel is landing hits, weathers it, and keeps the fight going, knowing that the longer Daniel runs Deepest Intentions at full tilt, the closer he gets to cognitive burnout. James is essentially playing the long game against an ability that burns fuel fast. Mid-game verdict, Daniel is competitive, landing real hits, forces James to adapt. The late game though, the late game turns into a hardware shitshow for Daniel, where his brain is essentially a Windows 7 computer trying to render a Pixar film in the middle of a desert. He starts pulling off these fusion, high-level copies plus path moves that should by all rights be terrifying. He's glitching out the prediction model, presenting James with moves that don't exist in any manual, and for a split second, James Lee's perfect Chaeyeon-woo face looks concerned, because Daniel isn't just copying anymore, rather he's using everything he has to his utmost limit. But here's where the copy lag comes up. Daniel is playing a high-stakes game of supposed to on 500 ping, while James is hooked on the Ethernet cable directly into the server. Every time Daniel tries to pivot from Gunn's brutalizing karate to Ji Chang's surgical handblades, there's a microsecond where his brain has to close a tab to open another. It's a weakness. A tiny loading icon that pops up over Daniel's head when he tries to switch characters. And the second James sees that window, he moves in. While Daniel is still mentally dragging a file from his copy folder to his active folder, James already delivered a 3-piece chicken McFucked it. But by now, the dashboard, Daniel's perception of time, which was once his greatest shield, starts stuttering like the special kid in class. The weakness reading that made James look immortal in the mid-game is now giving him false positives. It's the ultimate brutal irony. The second Daniel's focus slips, James's invisible attacks go from predictable to completely haunting. One moment Daniel thinks he's found a gap, and the next he's wondering why the sexual tension between his face and the pavement is so strong. James knows that the battery is at 1%. He's just waiting for the screen to go black. The final crushing realization is when they reach the threshold. Daniel has the world's most impressive collection of pirated software, but James Lee owns the hardware. You can copy a punch, but you can't copy a mastery. You can't download the literal blood and broken bones it takes to reach a mastery. James is operating on layers of speed, strength, and technique that Daniel has only read about in Wikipedia summaries for. In the late game, when one of them is running on fumes and the other one is just a little shocked, James is still a Ferrari with a full tank of ego, while Daniel is just a very talented Corolla that realized it doesn't have a check engine up. When it comes down to fundamentals, James' masteries are the bedrock that doesn't crack. Daniel's foundation, as impressive as it is, still has floors James has already walked through. Late game verdict, James closes it, not cleanly. Daniel made him work for it in ways few fighters ever have, but the copy lag, the deepest intentions, burnout, and the mastery gap all converge into the worst possible time for Daniel. And I could look at this fight over again and again, but the truth is James just has the advantage. Sure, Daniel has copy and his path, but that's about it. Not only does James has every mastery on the market, but he also has his undisclosed path. You could make an argument that if Daniel unlocks mastery, then he'd stand a better chance, and while that might be true, it's like a 1% chance becoming a 10, you know what I mean? Like sure, objectively, if Daniel unlocks mastery, he'd be on the same level as James, but even then, James takes the cake for experience. James just has more, which is why I think he'd win. But what do you guys think? If you guys got any thoughts or disagreements, comment them down below. I'll see you guys next week, or not if I choose to disappear for like a month again.
Death made this one. Yes, sir.